Okay, so this is what we're trying to create. So we'll go a little bit backwards. I'll show you the result before we look at the path to get to the result. And so here's our mantra, just unadorned at the moment, but it's in our circular shape, rotating clockwise. Let's take a look at the process that we used to get to this stage. So where we left off, we just created our mantra in a straight line, and at the moment there's, you know, the spacing's pretty much correct. I've made some adjustments to the scaling of the letters just using the transform tool, and I've got it pretty much the way I want it. I'm not paying too much attention to the spacing at the moment, and the reason that is because when we go to put it into that circular distribution or pattern, we're going to have to adjust or fine-tune the spacing at that point anyway, so it's just saving a little bit of time. So let's start a new document. And it's always best to work at a much higher resolution than you intend to use the picture at when you're doing something like this, because what's going to happen is that you'll end up doing maybe 3 or 4 transformations per sort of letter or syllable. And the greater the number of transformations, the greater the pixel degradation is that occurs with each of those transformations, and things start to look a little bit fuzzy. So if you're working at a low resolution, the computer just doesn't have enough pixel data to make those transformations without sort of making up its own little things, which is called interpolating. So if you're at a high resolution, the computer has a much larger area to sample from and to do its little algorithms and calculations, and it'll end up with a more accurate transformation, and it'll maintain the shape and the details, which is the most important thing, better. So let's drag our mantra off. Before we do that, we'll just select it. Okay, so all I've done is I've just selected it, and then I've pressed Command to cut it out of that document, and now it's sitting in our new document, and it's just a floating layer on transparency there. And what I'm going to do at this point is to make life easy, everything kind of needs to be on one layer, which is how we created the mantra in the first place. And all you're doing is copying and duplicating from that layer, and then sort of doing a paste, but it's staying within that layer. I think they call that a floating selection, and then it sort of sinks down to the layer that it's on, rather than ending up with a heap of layers with so many letters. It can become very confusing. So it's best just to keep things very simple, stay on one layer. So that's what we're going to do. So at the moment what I'm going to do is I'm just going to cut up the mantra so that it fits in our document window without rescaling it. So just choose a convenient place to cut that, and I'll just go Command C for cut. Oh, sorry, Command X for cut, and then Command V for paste, and we'll just pop that up there. And then we'll take the second half of our mantra and we'll pop it down here where it's out of the way. And then we'll have room to work in the center. So next step is to let's create some guides so we know exactly where we're going to work. So we're going to turn on in view, we're going to turn on snap, and then if we drag a guide in, it'll just snap automatically to the center of the image, which we know is 1500 pixels. Okay, so that's our center. Now we're going to draw a reference line, and we'll just use the shape tool to do that. We're going to create a shape with unfilled with a 1 point stroke. Now, at this point, there's a little bit of trial and error involved. What you want to avoid is doing creating an even space for each letter, because that's not going to work. I've experimented with that in the past, and you end up with the characters spaced. Some of them are very close together and some of them are far apart, and that's what would happen if you were using like a font, for example. So you often see that if someone's created a mantra that is circular using a font, which is easy to do in Illustrator or a program like that, you type along the circular path, and the computer, just does its best to calculate the spacing. And then so what you have is you have a lot of space between some letters. Some letters are squashed up, and it never looks right. It doesn't look as though it's been written correctly. So it's better to space the letters manually. An exception to that rule would be something like the Vajrayogini mantra, which has a certain number of characters that have to appear in one quadrant, and then a certain number that appears in this quadrant, and a certain number in this quadrant, and so on. And that relates to the directions of the petals of the heart chakra. But here there's no such requirement, so we're just going to do spacing in an artistic fashion so that it looks good. So, long story short, I've done a little bit of experimentation, and I know the correct spacing that's going to get this to work. Originally I started with a very large circle, and the letters were too far apart. Then I gradually came in and in and in, and I found over, I think it took me 3 goes to get it right. So what I'm going to do is I'm just going to drag that construction ellipse off our completed document. Oops. And there it is there. So just drag it until it snaps to the center, which is what it's doing. And I know now that when I space this, that I'm not going to end up with a heap of space in one of the quadrants. All the letters will be spaced appropriately, as though they were written by hand. Okay, so first step is we're going to do our Om. Now in this mantra I've chosen Om to be in the 12 o'clock position. There's no requirement that I understand scripturally for this mantra to appear in any particular way. Because it's not a deity mantra, I think I feel pretty comfortable to just use my own discrimination in terms of whether it goes clockwise, anti-clockwise, where the east or the west position is. And in this case I'm going to go clockwise, and the east position or the top is going to be at the top of the image in the 12 o'clock position. So with my lasso selection around it, I just press Command and then Alt together, and that little symbol comes up, which means I'm going to duplicate what's there. Or I can cut, one of the two. In this case I'm going to do neither. I'm going to go Command T, and make sure the right layer is selected. That's what I was saying before, those two need to be merged together. Okay, Command T, and then I'm just going to drag this down until it's in the central position. And then without doing any transformation, that one just will sit there like that. Okay, now I don't need to deselect that, just with my lasso tool selected, I now go to the svar and press Command T, and then I bring it down to the next position. And what we're trying to do is we're concentrating mainly on the head line of the letter here. I can't remember the name of that in Tibetan. It's probably like Uchen and Umer. And we're going to not worry about the tsek at the moment. We'll come around later and clean up the tsek. So see how that's sort of pointing off to the side. That needs to be transformed, as does that one. So we'll do that later. We're just going to get the basic spacing correct. Again, Command T. Just use the arrow keys to get it the way you want it. And remember, you don't have to get this exactly, perfect. You're trying to replicate something that's been drawn by hand. So you're trying to have an inbuilt amount of, variance in the line and the spacing and things like that. And then it brings some art to it rather than a mechanically produced font, which is what we're trying to avoid. It's the whole reason we're doing this process, to try and get a hand brushed mantra effect. One thing I'm going to do now is I'm going to go back into view and I'm going to get rid of snap, because that's causing some problems at the moment. It just causes things to be aligned ways you don't want them to be aligned, so I've removed that. And then just continuing on with our process, lasso tool, Command T for transform, drag it down, rotate it. Then just use the arrow keys to fine tune it. Oops. Now these particularly long stacks are a little bit problematic because they cause the letters to be spaced very closely together at this point, so you just have to be careful with those. And that's fairly typical. We're not. This is Tibetanized Sanskrit, so there's lots of really funny characters that are. If you were just reading Tibetan, you wouldn't be having quite this difficulty. For example, you don't get a letter stack like that in Tibetan that has 3 syllables. An inherent vowel and then a lengthening vowel at the bottom. So this is probably about as difficult a mantra as you'd come across. Okay, so just continuing to work down. If you're doing this for the first time, you're not going to be able to judge, unless you have some kind of freaky spatial ability, how your mantra is going to end up as you get around the end here. As I said, it's really just trial and error, and not getting too worried about the spacing at this point, because it's very, very easy to correct the spacing once the letters are aligned correctly, and I'll show you that at the end. Now these characters that have the double Anuswara there, I'm separating those, and I just found that with my trial and error method that it wasn't working to do them, to paste them together. Now just for symmetry, it would actually be kind of nice if that lines up on the on the 6 o'clock position there, so maybe I'll do that, and then later I can adjust the spacing here to just fill in that little excessive gap there. Okay, so this is looking pretty good. I'm happy with how it's going. It's pretty quick once you get started. Okay, getting close to the end now. So now another tall letter stack, which is nice because it's almost the same letter or word, sorry, as the one that's diagonally opposite, so that's creating some nice symmetry. So we've lucked out there. That wasn't planned, that's just the way it is. So this is a DDHAA and this is a DDHO. Okay, so getting close. Now, you may or may not have noticed that there was one thing that I left out of the mantra, hopefully only one thing, is that I didn't have an Anuswara above the Om, so we'll just correct that now. Just make it a little bit smaller. Positioning correct. And now here's our She, and we'll just bring that up into position. just alter that one just a little bit. And then we've got our ornament here, which I can't remember the name of. So I'll just pop that there. Probably needs to come across a little bit. And I'll just make a little correction here so that's not poking out the top. And I'll just choose where I want this to pivot from there, so let's do that. Okay, that's great. So now let's step back and we'll take a little bit of a look at our spacing and we'll make our corrections. So I would like to see a little bit more space between the tail of the ornament here and that last shade. So that's one point. I'd like to reduce the spacing there. Other than that, it's not too bad. So I'll show you how to now adjust the spacing very easily. So we'll turn our, show our guides again. Now we're trying to, let's work on this area first. So we're trying to bring that across. So let's look at the place where we want to make some space. So I think we can make some space. I think this is probably the first place here. That's a little bit tight. So Command T. And the secret is that if we just bring this center point of rotation to the very center, then this will rotate perfectly and we won't have to align the letters in any other way. Okay, that's good. And I think another place I'd like to have some space is probably, I think probably there. Again, move our center of rotation to there, create our space, enter. Okay, that's looking better. Now to correct this, let's bring everything across. Bring this across. And I think that's it. I think I'd like to have a little bit more space there. The shub cue there is bumping up there a little bit, so let's get our guides back. I'll just zoom in a bit so I can get the lasso correct. At the moment my keyboard has a sticky key and it's just driving me insane. Okay, it's come across a little bit. Be careful here because it's going to bump into the V vowel. It is also possible here you could do a little bit of a skew. So by holding down the command key, I can skew that a little bit. I'm not sure I'm liking that. Let's do our skew without removing it. Sorry, without removing the head part of the letter. That's a bit better. Okay, now let's get our ellipse back. I'll just reduce the opacity of that. And I'll just correct these couple of artsacks up here. So you can see how easy it is having everything on one layer. You can see I haven't worried too much about following this line exactly, because we're trying to get that that human feel. What I might do is I might just, that's bugging me a little bit, I might just rotate that a little bit. Whoops. Might do the same with that. Okay. Other than that, I think we're finished. So there's our mantra. Next up, we're going to do a little bit of ornamentation on this. So we'll add some, a few different effects to it. I'm thinking, since this is the mantra of dissolving into emptiness, what I'd like to see is some visual indication of that. So I'm going to have a bit of I think I'll enclose this in a little bit of a sphere, representing a sphere of Dharma, or the sphere of emptiness, and then maybe have some light rays, some kind of ornamentation to try and give an artistic feel for what this mantra is actually saying, which is to say that Prabhupada Rinpoche says that when you say this mantra, things dissolve into emptiness, and you imagine that nothing is appearing to you. But I think so many people get that wrong. They think everything just becomes black or empty in the sense of being nothing. It's empty in the sense of nothing self-existent appearing to the mind of the meditator, which is a very different thing. Lama Tsongkhapa went to great effort, and Ari Nagarjuna and Chandrakirti, they all went to immense effort to try and clarify that single point of what emptiness is and what it isn't, and what dependent origination is and isn't. And this mantra is all about that. So it's a very beautiful topic to be dealing with, and hopefully we'll be able to do it justice artistically. Okay, I hope you enjoyed this section. We'll go to the next section, and maybe even the next video, and we'll see what we come up with.